it going? It's your boy Gsluke here for our DFS fades and sleepers for this week's Zurich Classic. It is by far the most important video of the week. Here we're going to be going over the most overhyped and overlooked teams of the week. Of course, the goal here is to try and identify some of those lower owned leverage plays we can go to that aren't really being talked about. They're going to be relatively low owned, and if they end up coming through for us this week, are going to give us plenty of leverage to the field, particularly for these large field tournaments. And of course, our fades, the guys you want to avoid, the more overhyped plays that perhaps are going to be a little bit chalky this weekend. I see busting rather than coming through for a huge performance. So of course, this is more of a game theory video, not just taking a look at projections, but also how many lineups these guys are going to be in, of course, to try and give us an edge in some of these large field GBPs. So with that being said, let's go ahead and hop right on into it. All right, guys, on the screen, you can see our projections for this week, and we're going to go ahead and start this off with our fades. And up top, the most expensive team on the slate, also the highest owned team on the slate, Collin Morikawa and Viktor Hovland, going to be extremely bold fades for us this week. If you guys have been around on the channel, you know I'm not afraid at all to take bold stances against players, particularly when they're the highest owned player and the highest priced player on the slate. And if we take a look at just their composition as a team, of course, both top 5 players in the world. That's why they're getting so much steam. That's why they're deserving betting favorites at this event. But when we're playing DFS, you know, a lot of game theory comes into play. It's not quite as simple as just going to the betting favorite. Of course, we have to keep in mind ownership and, of course, the range of outcomes, which for Collin Morikawa and Viktor Hovland is extremely volatile. We've never seen these two in group play together. Of course, on the Ryder Cup, they were on opposing sides, played against each other in a singles match. But at the same time, they've also never played together on the collegiate route. They never played on a Walker Cup team or anything like that. So they played against each other plenty of times in the past, but really don't have any type of experience on the same team. So if we take a look at their team play record, you can see for both of them, it's pretty lackluster, including Collin Morikawa's missed cut last year with Matthew Wolff, and Viktor Hovland, playing among his countrymate, also was only able to finish in 25th place. So even though they made the cut, they really struggled over the weekend. So you can argue that both of them were disappointing the first time out, especially considering that both of them had relatively solid partners, and it wasn't really the strongest strength of the field. I mean, this year it is much stronger than what we had last time out. So to miss the cut especially is extremely concerning for Collin Morikawa. Another thing to consider here is the skill sets, right? They're pretty good at the same things. They're both really solid off the tee, really solid on approach, but struggle immensely around the green. Whereas some of these other groups here are more complementary. They're able to gain across the board with all 4 major statistical categories, whereas this is one of the few groups up top where they have a glaring weakness. So if I'm going to nitpick about any of these elite tier groups, I would quantify all of them as quote unquote super groups up top, people that are more than capable of winning this event with their relative lack of experience at this format. Of course, both of them disappointing the first time out here, and also their lack of experience playing with each other, whereas guys like Cantlay and Xander Schauffele have played many times together. Of course, Cam Smith and Mark Leishman, your defending champions, and Billy Horschel and Sam Burns, also extremely familiar, and it's one of the best groups of friends here on tour as well. So a lot more familiarity with these other quote-unquote super teams. So they're the guys I'm a little bit more confident going to. So they are going to be a fade. I'm going to have 0% in my large field GPPs, which, of course, anytime you're fading 2 top 5 players in the world together, it is going to leave a little bit of a nasty feeling in your stomach. But it's a large field tournament, right? These are large field GPPs. You have to be bold to take these kind of things down. And this is a volatile event. I would not be surprised at all if they went out there and missed the cut this week, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they won this going away. So it's one of those circumstances where you're going to have to be bold, and that's the stance that I'm going with there. Next up, we're going to be fading the defending champions, Cam Smith and Mark Leishman. In fact, Cam Smith is a 2-time champion at this event and at this format. One with Jonas Blixt back in 2017. At $10,200 though, I am worried about his recent form. Cam Smith specifically missed the cut the last time out. Of course, at the Masters on Sunday, was spraying the ball left and right, and it didn't look like he fixed anything at the RBC Heritage. Was missing into the trees, and even though the approach play and the putting was there for him, it wasn't enough to make the cut. And now they're an elite tier player. I mean, somebody like Mark Leishman, who has been successful at this format in the past, specifically with a Cameron Smith, isn't playing his best golf, right? If you take a look at some of the shots gain metrics, you'll see for Leishman, he's losing pretty significantly off the tee. Same thing with a Cam Smith. Now the approach play is better. Same thing with the short game, right? This is why these are both top 30 players in the world. But when you compare them to Patrick Cantlay and Xander Schauffele, of course, you know, studs that are always going to be around, or even Billy Horschel and Sam Burns, they're hitting the ball a lot better, and they're also a much more well-rounded team. In fact, teams like Billy Horschel and Sam Burns, and same thing with Patrick Cantlay and Xander Schauffele, who I much prefer, who to that super team up top and this Cameron Smith and Mark Leishman group are gaining across all 4 categories. Whereas, of course, off the tee is the issue for Cam Smith and Mark Leishman. Around the green is the issue for Colin Morikawa and Victor Hovland. They have their one weakness. So, like I said, you kind of have to nitpick with these teams up top. You can't play all of these super teams together because if you try to, you're going to have no leverage to them, right? You're going to be flat across the board with your ownership, which makes taking down one of these large field GPPs nearly impossible. So that's going to be the second fade that I'm going with there. Of course, they're my number 1 and number 2 model ranked plays on the slate. So it is a quote unquote bold fade, but I have my reasons for it, right? A lot of it comes down to skill set. With Colin and Victor Hovland also comes down to experience. And now lastly, the last fade I'm going to, and it's another one I hate to make because I'm fading my boy Mito Pereira, and I just expect this to be much more owned, this group I should say, to be much more owned than they should be due to narrative. Of course, Joaquin Niemann, Mito Pereira, country mates, they've known each other for quite some time. They play pretty much every practice round together. The unfortunate part is they are priced up for that occasion. Of course, the narrative is kind of built in there. Some of the betting odds reflect that relationship, and of course the ownership. So not only are they more expensive than they probably should be, if I was pricing it, they should be closer to where Will Zalatoris and Davis Riley are, probably closer to $9,000. So that's not a huge glaring misprice or anything like that, but they're one of the highest owned players on the slate. In fact, of this 9K range, only a team like Ian Poulter and Shane Lowry actually comes in with higher ownership, and of course they're higher priced, right? So it's just an interesting debacle we have here, where it's a player that I love playing, right? Mito Pereira, Joaquin Niemann, both really solid ball strikers, but the sentiment is just too high on them. I mean, if they were 15 to 20% owned, again, if they were closer to $9,000 where I expected them to be, I'd be much more willing to play them. But unfortunately, if you take a look at the shots gained metrics, they do gain in every category, but it's very slight in 2 of them, right? Very slight gainers around the green, so more of a neutral player there. Or a neutral player with the putter. They get it all done with the ball striking, and they're very similar with their numbers. I mean, take a look at this. You can see off the tee, gaining nearly the same amount of strokes per round. On approach, you can see Mito Pereira a little bit sharper than Joaquin Niemann has been, but the smaller and smaller sample size that you give, the better and better Niemann becomes. It's a great pairing, right? I love playing these guys. I talk about them almost every single week. I just don't love them that much, right? I don't love them enough to play them in 40-50% of my lineups like you're going to have to for somebody that's 23.7% owned. So just guys I'd rather prefer here. I mean, first and foremost, Sergio Garcia, Tommy Fleetwood. They've had a ton of success at this format in the past. In fact, they finished, what was it, second place back in 2018. Let me go check that. It was back in 2019 they finished in second place. Of course, Tommy Fleetwood also finished in 4th with another partner in 2018. So he's had plenty of success there. And then you have Ian Poulter and Shane Lowry, who are both playing some pretty solid golf, particularly Ian Poulter over his last few events has really turned things around. And Shane Lowry is one of the hottest golfers in the world right now. They haven't played together in this format before, but they played together at Ryder Cups. They've had a lot of success there. They're pretty solid friends, and separately, at least Ian Poulter has had some success. See a top 10 finish, 22nd and 32nd place finish, so made the cut the last 3 times out here. Shane Lowry is 1 for 2, but now that they're paired up, I'm expecting those type of groupings to just be a little bit more consistent than, these two volatile ball strikers, right? They're very liable to go out there, bleed some strokes around the green. They're not always the most consistent putters, particularly Mito Pereira. He's losing right around 2 strokes per round putting over his last 8 rounds. The fact that he was even in contention at the RBC Heritage was a miracle. The guy wasn't able to make anything out there. Was completely carrying himself with his tee to green play, which is exciting for his future play, but he's got to turn around the putting at some point. And that just could be a problem at an event where you got to get to 20, 25 under par to win. So as much as I like my 2 Chilean guys, I play them literally every single week, it seems. They are going to be a fade this time around. Just in terms of the ownership, it is much too bullish. People are just looking into that narrative a little bit too much. And now let's move on to our sleeper picks. So these are going to be lower owned plays, a little bit cheaper on the board that I'm expecting to come through, and just maybe a lot of people aren't talking about them. So let's start off with Grayson Sigg and Sepp Straka at $8,300. First off, in terms of the modeling, it's either a top 15 model rank, which in this price range is very solid value. You see guys like Brendan Todd and Chris Kirk, who I've already talked about this week, were also top 10 stat fits. So not a surprise that I'm adding them to my pool. But most importantly, if we take a look at the shots gained metrics, they're gaining in every category but around the green. And around the green, they're losing by 8 thousandths of a stroke per round. So it's hardly anything, right? They're pretty much a neutral player in that category. Pretty close to neutral on approach and also off the tee, but gain a ton of strokes with the putter. So, up top, we're really looking for guys that have to be a well-rounded skill set. But outside of that 9 and 10K range, if you can find a well-rounded skill set, that's a dime a dozen. Most of these groups at least lose in 1 to maybe even 2 shots gained categories as a group, whereas this group pretty much gains across the board. And if you take a look at their complementary skill set, you can see Straka a little bit better than Sig off the tee, whereas Sig a little bit better than Straka on approach. So they're complementary in that fashion. Around the green, similar story, right? You can see better for Sepp Straka, also a little bit of a better putter there. So if somebody like Sig can go out there, be extremely precise, get them with a lot of greens in regulation, Sepp Straka can cash in a lot of those for birdie, especially on the alternate shot format. I expect them to be a very, very comfortable pairing. If you take a look at the recent form, you see Sepp Straka's playing some beautiful golf, right? 3rd, 30th, 35th, 9th, the win at the Honda Classic. I mean, the guy's playing some great golf. Same thing with Sepp Straka. So I should say Grayson Sig. 48th, 25th, 41st, right? Just making cuts, right? You can't really, you're not going to win a GPP by finishing in 35th place or 41st place or anything like that. But they're at the very least playing some consistent golf. And if they can catch a hot putter this week, one or even both of them, Sepp Straka's had that hot putter for 2 months now. I guess it's more up to Grayson Sig to bring that hot putter around. They could have a very solid week. Next up for the next sleeper pick, we have Charles Schwartzel and Christian Bezainhout, 2 countrymen that'll be playing together. And Charles Schwartzel has looked a lot better of late. So it wasn't just at the Masters. A lot of people thought, and I was one of these people, that it could have just been his happy place, right? He's won there before. He has a 2nd place finish. He has a ton of solid finishes at Augusta National. So maybe it was just that 1 week that he went off. Fortunately for him, it was not just that 1 week. At the RBC Heritage, played some really solid golf. He was in contention for quite some time. And Bezainhout has also quietly been playing some solid golf. So I think they're a little bit of a sneaky pairing. Bezainhout, if you just were pricing all of these players individually, it'd probably be closer to $9,000 on this slate. Charles, probably a $7,500 golfer. So certainly he's the lower skilled of the two there. But I like how they match up. Bezainhout, more of a short game specialist, a really well-rounded player, gains in pretty much all 4 stat categories, whereas Charles Schwartzel, more of a ball striking specialist, right? Isn't going to gain a ton of strokes with the putter. Bezainhout can do that, right? He can get really hot with the putter. He's more of a pop player than anything. If you take a look at the shots gained metrics for him, you can see off the tee is the one weakness, right? You can see Bezainhout right around average. This is mostly skewed for his data, right? If you take a look at Charles Schwartzel, he had that 40 to 50 round stretch there where he was missing pretty much every single cut. You can see he was still an average player on approach. He was still right around average around the green. So don't look into the numbers too much here, right? This is for a relatively large sample size. He was playing some really bad golf, but based on what we saw at the RBC and of course at the Masters where he was in contention for quite a while there, is playing a much better brand of golf. So if you're buying in early on Charles Schwartzel, has a really solid partner here in Christian Bezainhout, who probably makes that group a little bit underpriced, especially at their type of ownership where he's just 11.2% owned. Next up, we're going to be going to Joseph Bramlett and Maverick McNealy as the last sleeper pick. And this is a high upside group, but also highly volatile, I'll say. Of course, Maverick McNealy is the anchor of these 2 players, is really the guy that you're buying in on. Much like a Bezainhout, probably if he was priced individually, closer to $9,000, maybe even $9,500. Now, Bramlett, a little bit of a lower tier player, right? Probably a $7,000 golfer if you're pricing them individually. But as a sum, I think that they have the upside because first off, Bramlett, an absolute striper, somebody who's going to gain a ton of strokes off the tee and on approach. And McNealy, more of a short game guy, but also has really stepped up his around the green, his approach play, and off the tee play over the last 3 months. That's why he's had this meteoric rise here on the PGA Tour. And it's just an interesting matchup, right? If Bramlett can just hit all their approach shots, have a ton of, shots gained off the tee for the group, and McNealy just makes a ton of putts, this is a really high upside group. But unfortunately, Bramlett can get them in a ton of trouble in alternate shot. McNealy doesn't always have his best stuff with the ball striking, and unless they're really, feeding off of Bramlett's ball striking in McNealy's short game, it could go really, really bad really fast. They're just a really volatile group. Of course, they do have the upside, though. If we take a look at the shots gained metrics, getting a ton of strokes off the tee, getting a ton of strokes on approach, around the green, not really a strong suit for either of them. McNealy a little bit better than Bramlett. The putter, though, a little bit of Jekyll and Hyde, right? One guy losing a ton of strokes, one guy gaining a ton of strokes. So as long as they can feed into that complementary type of skill set, could see some success here. So they are a first-time group. I believe they didn't play together last year. Maybe they did. I'd have to double check on that. And either way though, experience isn't really why we're going to try and play these guys. It's more of the skill set fit. And of course, the steps forward that we've seen from somebody like a Maverick McNeely, and even some of the small steps we've seen from Brantlett. That's all I've got for the fades and sleepers. Before you hop on out of here, let me know down in the comments what your biggest fade is, and of course, your biggest sleeper pick for this week. I appreciate you guys. Would love to hear from you guys down below. Make sure you like the video if you haven't already. Also, make sure you're subscribed to the channel here so you don't miss any of the content I'm posting in the future. We will have a DFS live stream tonight that'll be at 7 p.m. Eastern time, so make sure to stop on by for that. We'll cover the weather, my player poll again, any of your live questions, just getting you prepped for the slate this week. So make sure you stop on by there. Make sure you're subscribed, like I said. I appreciate you guys. I'll see you guys next time. Best of luck with all of your DFS lineups for this week, and let's get this cash.